I have been an adjunct here at San Jose State in the teacher education program for about the past 8 years. And then 2 years ago, I entered the tenure track in teacher education.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. Prior to that, I was actually a high school teacher for 15 years.
15, okay.
And so a lot of the experiences that I've had explicitly addressing students with any form of disability has been as a high school teacher. But I also do have students who have disabilities in the program here at San Jose State. So I've got a lot of experience working with students of a variety of abilities.
Great, you could share your experience with us. Sometimes faculty will come to our office and ask, so, you know, I received a letter from AEC, Accessible Education Center, and saying I'm going to have this, a visually impaired student enroll in my class. What do I do?
One of the things that I have instituted as a regular part of my practice is sending out an electronic, accessible, and I actually use Qualtrics to do this, survey prior to class. And this survey surveys all of the students, because students who may or may not be identified through the AEC may also need additional supports. So I ask questions that kind of give me an idea of their background, of the content that I'm teaching. But then I always include questions like, what have you found your teachers in the past have done that helps you learn in a classroom or engage in a classroom? And I also ask, what can I do? What supports do you need from me to be able to help you navigate this class? And I found that most of the time my students will be very honest and upfront and tell me themselves what it is that they need or what it is that they would like.
Okay. I also understand sometimes, you know, AEC cannot disclose, or they actually encourage the student to disclose their disability directly to the faculty. And so faculty really want to help the student, but definitely waiting for the student to approach them, and they don't always disclose. But if they do come to the faculty, how can faculty talk with them? What kind of question? Help me frame this question to talk to the student.
Okay, great. So I'm actually also legally blind.
Oh.
And so I'll answer this as a professor, but also somewhat as how I would answer this as a student.
Thank you.
For the most part, speaking as a student and as a person with a disability, I would like to be seen as an individual, as myself, and not necessarily seen as my disability. So when approached, it can be tricky to ask questions about the disability to me, because I'm very open to talk about my disability. I'm perfectly fine and more than willing to share my experiences. Not all students who have disabilities are as open.
Or maybe they don't know how.
Or maybe they don't, they might also not know how. So getting to know the student as a person first can help make that conversation less awkward. So if first you and I build a relationship and I know about you as a person, then you'll be more comfortable with me telling me about your needs or the supports that you need in the class. And I've had that experience as well, where I have had students who were not identified by the AEC, because I teach graduate students. So a lot of times they aren't necessarily aware of the AEC and what supports are provided. But I've had students who maybe 2 to 3 weeks into the course will come to me and say, I feel comfortable enough with you right now to be able to tell you this about myself. And so a lot of that comfort comes from building a relationship, just noticing and asking, hey, you know, I play video games and I noticed you have a video game logo on your backpack or on your notebook, or I've, just some sort of connection
Okay.
that allows the student to know that you're interested in them as a person before
I see.
you're interested in them as a person with a disability.
I see. So you kind of start maybe by sharing a little bit about yourself and create a very welcoming climate in
Yes.
your classroom, and then maybe ask the students some other things, and then kind of delve into
Yes.
how exactly I can support you, not the very first question.
No, not the very
I see.
first question, because it can be threatening.
Yes.
And so we want to try and, we've got a lot of the literature in connecting in education
Mhm.
is that if a student connects with an adult on campus,
Mhm.
they are more likely to not drop out.
Okay,
And that
I see.
connection is a relationship. And so that's kind of how I think about my classes.
Mhm.
If I form a relationship with the student, not only are they less likely to drop my class,
Mhm.
but they're also more likely to really communicate their needs with me
Uh-huh.
as we go through the course.
Okay. Okay, so once they get through, say, the hurdle, they get
Yes.
to know the student, hopefully, or hopefully the student, I understand from the research,
Mhm.
2/3 of students, they do not disclose. So
Right.
that makes the job of a faculty very challenging.
Yes.
How, in general, I know you cannot label, there's no one size fits all.
No.
But maybe help us with some general guideline. How would you, help a student not knowing, where
So-
they're coming from?
Yes. In teaching high school,
Mhm.
often I had students who had disabilities who were not aware of the fact that they had a disability yet.
Okay.
So
Wow,
that can
okay,
also,
yes.
be, like with my vision loss, I
Mhm.
didn't know I was visually disabled until I was 25.
Oh,
So it's one
okay.
of those things where, as a disabled person, oftentimes the way we live our lives is
Uh-huh.
just, that's our normal.
I
And so
see,
we don't
okay.
realize that,
Yes.
everybody else doesn't see what I see.
Uh-huh.
I was always amazed by athletes catching things that I'm like,
Mhm.
how did they even see that coming?
Oh,
But
Uh-huh.
in that case,
uh-huh.
so I had students who didn't know they had a disability, which
Yeah,
is similar to
yeah.
a student who won't disclose their disability.
Right. Yes.
And so how do I design my course
Uh-huh.
in order to make sure that even if they don't know that they have a disability, that
Mhm.
the materials are accessible?
Mhm.
So one of the things I do is that when I am planning my lessons,
Mhm.
I really try to think about kind of the worst case scenario. I'm the
Mhm.
most optimistic pessimist you're ever
Uh-huh.
going to meet. So
Uh-huh.
what are all of the things that could go wrong? What are
Okay.
the things that could, if I have a student who's visually disabled, how am I making sure that within my lesson plan, whether I know they're visually disabled or
Uh-huh.
not, they can access the information,
Right.
they can interact
Right.
with peers.
Mhm.
If I have a student who's hard of hearing or deaf, how am I also crafting the lesson so that when I'm thinking about having my students turn and talk,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
That I am making sure that I'm setting the conditions
Okay.
so that that student can participate
Mhm.
just as much as a student who is fully hearing.
Okay.
And in that case, sometimes it's about controlling the noise of the whole class.
Okay.
Because when you're hard of hearing, one of the things that's difficult is the directional hearing. Being
All
able
right.
to,
Okay.
if you and I are
Mhm.
talking and the whole room is full of people talking,
Yeah.
and I'm hard of hearing, it's hard for me to necessarily hear
Focus on-
you and
Mhm.
focus on you.
Mhm.
So setting up the classroom so that there's space between the partners.
I see.
Setting up norms in the classroom for when we have discussions, we
Okay.
want to use this level of voice so that we can
Okay.
make sure we're all heard by one another.
I see.
Providing students with opportunities to draw or to write as they're working together
Okay.
is another way that can help students who
Yeah.
have auditory
Mhm.
processing.
All right.
But just kind of thinking about how am I crafting the activities that I'm doing
Okay.
to make sure that everyone has access. It's universal
Alright.
design for learning.
Yes. Thanks. Two questions come to my mind as I'm listening to you. One is maybe you could educate us about the range of possibility, for the blindness to help the faculty. Maybe the faculty should, knowing this possibility,
Right.
then maybe they should design some kind of pretest to, so you'll find out? I don't know, does that make any sense?
It makes absolute
Oh,
sense.
okay.
And I'm going to give you just a few easy things.
Okay.
Because there are a range of visual disabilities. Just
All right.
because someone is blind and carries a cane
Uh-huh.
doesn't necessarily mean they have no vision.
Oh,
Okay.
really? Okay.
It may mean that there are four basic types. So the
Okay.
first is they have no vision whatsoever.
Mhm.
That's actually a very small percentage of the people who are visually disabled.
All right.
Most of us have some vision.
Okay.
Some vision. For me personally, I have my visual challenge is I only have central vision.
Mm.
So when I'm looking at you, I can see your face, but nothing else around you.
Okay.
Okay.
Not the peripheral.
No peripheral.
Mhm.
For some students, they only have peripheral, so they're losing their center. And this is going to be, it's most common in macular degeneration.
Okay.
So if you have students who are second career students, this may actually be, it's something that frequently comes on with age. So if a person is visually disabled and older, there's a good chance that they might have macular degeneration.
What does that mean? That mean if the faculty or instructor write on the board, they don't see what
They might not see it.
Okay.
Or they might turn their head this way, and you think that they're not paying attention, but they've turned their head to be the side of the board so they can read out of the periphery.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so sometimes these things are just being able to understand why students might do the things they do and
I
not
see.
take it personally.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, so we covered two parts?
Two
or-
parts,
Okay.
and so the third is a student may have low visual acuity. So they may not be able to see clearly. They may see shapes or colors, but not necessarily clearly.
Mm.
So for all students with disabilities,
Mhm.
one of the biggest challenges in a classroom actually has to do with the way we communicate and how we say, look over there.
Okay.
Over there doesn't help us. So if
Where's
you want
there?
us to go pick something up, if you want us to get equipment, if you want us to know where to get our papers and our feedback if you're using paper,
Mhm.
we really need it to be specific. On the right-hand side of the room towards the front,
Mhm.
in the center of the room towards the back.
Mhm.
Something like that helps us have a better idea of where to go.
Mm.
And also creating a climate of students helping one another in the classroom so that if I
Okay.
am kind of flustered and not sure, that students naturally will chime in and help me find what I need.
Mhm.
So for all of us, that is a very important thing. For all of us, it is also an important thing to, as much as humanly possible, make your materials accessible
Mhm.
by screen reader.
Okay, screen readable when you say.
Screen readable, so that if I'm supposed to read an article for class,
Mhm.
that article can be read by a screen reader,
Okay. Mhm.
and that I can listen to it instead of physically reading it.
Okay.
That can be difficult because a
Uh-huh.
lot of times in our research articles
Yes.
are in columns.
Right.
An Adobe screen reader doesn't necessarily read
Deep.
the
I do
columns.
know.
So just thinking about
Okay.
ensuring that any articles that you are going to give are compliant with
Okay.
screen readers.
Now, two more questions.
Yes.
Is, screen readable, to what degree of detail? You know, there are things, the screen readable depends on which one they use.
Right.
Some of them, for instance, they don't read the minus well. You know, like the grade,
Right.
A plus, A minus, they don't,
Right.
unless you spell it out. So should we ask the faculty, you know, of course, I would think in a math situation, you want to be very detailed, right?
Right.
But in some time, can we assume, I know this is kind of a hard, right?
Mhm.
That in the context, is that safe to make that assumption, that in the context, the student will be able to figure it out, or what's your advice? And the second part of the question also is, I have worked with a design in the art faculty, and so the comment she was saying that I cannot provide the screen readable because then
Right.
I'm giving out the content. I
Right.
actually want the student to see and then tell me what do they see. So
Right.
what would you do on these kind of situations?
So as far as giving the content, you want to still describe as completely as possible. Because unlike a person with full vision, you're asking me then to describe something I literally can't see. So either providing me with more description or giving me an alternative art piece that's tactile, so that I can describe what I feel and use my other senses to be able to provide you input on the aesthetics of the art piece. To be able to show you that I understand balance, but from a very different perspective, because I can't see. If you were to ask me to stand in one place and not move my head, but describe a mural around me, I wouldn't be able to, because I wouldn't be able to see the whole thing. I would only be able to tell you about a small part of it. Similarly, it's kind of like you wouldn't ask a person with a broken leg to run a race. It's the same idea. You would find something that will give you the same outcome of knowing that they've mastered a concept, but in a different format that's accessible to them.
So I assume there are probably lots of one-on-one exploring, find out what the student needs are.
Yes.
Because you can, it's really, you have to make a judgment somewhere.
Yes,
How, to what degree of detail.
That's true. So one of the things I've done as a professor and as a teacher is when I look at a concept that my students are mastering, and I want to know if they've mastered that concept, I try to think of 3 different ways that my students can show me.
All right.
And then, so that I'm not drawing attention to and singling out the person with the visual disability by saying, okay, everyone else, we're going to look at Guernica by Picasso, and you're going to touch this sculpture. Instead, saying, there are 3 different options. And as a student, you can select the option to be able to show me that you understand the concept of balance. One of these options is a sculpture that is tactile and you can touch and feel and describe. One of them is a painting, Guernica by Picasso. The third one is audio. It's a piece of music that's an experimental art music piece. And so as I'm looking for this one skill or piece of knowledge that I want my students to have,
Depending on the goal.
Depending on the goal. And in that way, if I have a student in class who hasn't identified themselves, they still can get the accessibility.
This would be very good kind of pre-test items as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And you are talking exactly practicing a universal design.
It is.
Providing them option, and then you can still achieve your goal.
Yes.
To find out.
Other benefit is that in addition to providing accessibility, research in learning education shows that when you provide students with choices, they're more engaged in what they're learning. So everyone benefits from providing the choice.
Yes, that's great, that example. Well, can you share with us kind of takeaway message for us, for faculty and also from the student perspective, if you can?
Okay. So, yes, so in general, advice would be to really, as a professor, imagine yourself as a student with any one of these challenges. And what would you want your professor to do to help you access the curriculum? Or think of yourself as a parent whose child is a student with one of these challenges. What would you want that professor to do to support your child? The best thing you can do is research on your own. Find out a little bit more about the different kinds of disabilities. And I'm very excited you're doing this video series because this is a great opportunity for faculty to watch all of the videos to get that insight into different students and faculty and how we are addressing our own challenges and the challenges of our students. The more you learn, the more ideas you'll have about differentiating your curriculum. Yeah, and build those relationships with students.
Build
Those relationships are very, very, very important. And they don't have to be best friends for life relationships, but they should be something wherein you know the person is an individual, not an individual with a disability.